Yep. It's fascinating hearing your whole story. Personally, particularly,
A bit louder.
Your childhood and all the experiences in Hungary. I'm just wondering, it may seem like a trivial question, but I think it's not. But have you considered writing a book with all of this down alongside your later experiences with the Labour Party? So that would be a great way to get your whole story out there, and I think it's a very relevant story. That's all I wanted to ask.
Just one more, I think. Take another question here, and then that's quite an easy one.
Oh, thank you very much, Stephen, for sharing your story tonight, and for all the work and campaigning that you do on Palestine. Thank you to the camp for organising the event. It's been really amazing. I'm Felix. I'm part of the Revolutionary Communist Group, Fight Racism, Fight Imperialism. I'd like to extend solidarity to you, Stephen, for your interview that you're facing on Friday. We'll certainly be there to support at Charing Cross. I know a lot of people are also being pursued by the state for similar reasons. Two of our comrades are the SOAS 2, two young students facing prison time for allegedly supporting terrorism, which of course they don't. They've just stuck up for the Palestinian resistance. And I've got some leaflets about that as a petition to sign if people want to take one from me. After this, that would be great. And if people want to get a copy of our newspaper, then please do. We have a letter from Francesca Nadine, a member of Palestine Action, who's currently in prison for supporting Palestine. Oh, brilliant. Okay, fantastic. Great. Yeah, my question was, I mean, in light of the increased state repression that we're facing for supporting Palestine, how do you think the movement in Britain needs to develop in order to tackle this state repression and to try to force the British state to sanction Israel and sever ties with Israel?
I want to start with mentioning something about the communist connection, because almost my entire family, after liberation, immediately joined the Communist Party. My father was saying that of all the organizations, it was the communists who really resisted the fascists. That was his experience, and so he joined without hesitation. So did my mother, my uncles, almost everybody in my family. I have to also mention, though, that because my mom had a landowning connection in Transylvania, later she was a victim of one of the purges. As a class alien, she was thrown out of the Communist Party, that she was quite upset about. But it had no other consequence. My father stayed on, and so on. But I have to add that we had a rather bitter experience of the particular Stalinist communist clique which dominated the Hungarian politics. They were clever people, and in some ways heroic people, because the mini Stalin, Mátyás Rákosi, was in prison, Horthy, the regent's prisons, for 16 years, etc. So they suffered, but they became divorced from the people, and they pretty much abolished, obviously with Stalinist Soviet promptings and influence, abolished democracy inside the party and out. So although they brought in much needed social reforms very quickly, amazingly radical in the first years, they had seriously deteriorated and staged a series of show trials against, ostensibly against Titoist fractions, and generally speaking, did a great disservice to the cause. And they were undercut and undermined by Khrushchev's speech at the 20th Congress, where he denounced the personality cult of Stalin, and all these mini Stalins in the European people's democracies had become untenable. And rather than realizing that they had to give way to a new generation of leaders, they tried to cling on to powers, and this is why the 56 uprising, for example, happened. And it was a tragedy, really, that the genuinely experimental regime of Imre Nagy, who would have followed, didn't have a chance to be established, and he was executed quite unnecessarily. It's the same fate as befell Dubček later in the Czech Republic. And it is a terrible shame that these experiments weren't allowed that time to develop. Same about Allende, I suppose. So that's on that one. Regarding where we could develop and what we can do to exert further influence and halt the direction of travel, which is towards the brutalism of current Germany, where the protesters have an even rougher time than over here, and where even the showing of a Palestine flag is illegal, and so on. How to prevent sliding in that direction is simply by ever increasing numbers protesting. That's okay in the short term, and I think the ever increasing numbers would eventually work on, certainly on the Labour Party, but also on other parties, to show that there could be electoral consequences in maintaining the current direction of travel. And beyond that, I hope that a new party will emerge, a new left party. And if it had, well, I think it would be difficult to talk Jeremy Corbyn into having it, because he had enough. But if somebody like him or himself reoccurred at the head of such a popular left party, I think it would have a serious chance again, at least electorally. What that would lead to is another question, because the establishment is so strong. If Jeremy had won in 2017, we all know that his program would have been fought against by the Parliamentary Labour Party. So we don't know how much of it could have been enacted. But maybe some of it. After all, he was not much different from Clement Attlee in program.
And the book? The idea of the book?
Sorry, I didn't catch on suggestion.
Peter was suggesting have you thought about writing a book about your life, given everything you've been through and the comparisons with what we're experiencing today?
Yes, I have had suggestions of this, and I would like to, in principle. I find it difficult at the moment to find the time, but being an architect and having had a period when I was not active in politics, between 56 and almost between 56 and 97, my main interest was in the arts, and I am a amateur painter, and I like drawing. And because my father was a psychoanalyst and took an interest in my childhood drawings, I have a continuity of drawings from age 3 almost to present day. And I am thinking about putting something together, a kind of a life through drawings.
Yes.
And that could be extended with some other commentary of experiences. So yes, the answer is yes, in principle. But I find it very difficult to. I have various offers of help, and that's my favorite thing to do, to be honest, to get that done.
Yeah, okay. You mentioned Greenstein. You're meeting Tony Greenstein,
Yes.
and so I wondered, have you read his book about Zionism during the Holocaust? Because it has a whole chapter about Hungary.
That's a bit I read.
Okay. Yes. Well, what you said earlier is slightly different to what he's writing in the book, as far as I remember. He doesn't mention, as far as I remember, the money bit, but what he does say that there was a deal done with the Nazis in response to the Nazis being worried about the experience of the Warsaw uprising might happen again. So the Zionists assured them that they will make sure that the whole kind of deportation and thing would be a quiet affair. And they apparently sent out letters to all around the country, to the ghettos that had been established by then, and basically writing, and he actually quotes from the letter, telling them that, just follow the orders of the SS, because that will be in the best interest of each individual and the community as a whole, for example, which I was quite shocked at seeing. And he also, apparently, this is Kastner plus his partner, writing to the minister and saying, if you carry out deportations, try and do it in a humane way. So he was very aware that they was doing a deal to save prominent Jews. He actually said 600 families, and established actually a list of the prominent Jews that he wanted the SS to save, eventually to go to Switzerland, and he was okay with the less prominent Jews to be deported to wherever.
Yeah.
So do you disagree with this, or is that just wondering your response?
Yes, yeah, okay.
And secondly, just because you mentioned the experience of the Communist Party and so on, do you know the films by Marta Messerosh?
I heard of her, and she's a bit after my period in Hungary. So
Yeah, because she kind of her autobiographical films deal with
That
the
period.
experience
Yeah.
of her family and vis-a-vis the Communist Party.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating,
Yeah.
it is.
It's a complicated story.
Yes.
I did have discussions with Tony Greenstein about this subject, and there isn't much evidence. It is said that it was part of the deal for Kastner, as I know it from Tony, to keep quiet about the dangers, suppress the knowledge of what the camps meant. I don't know about actively writing around and any kind of written evidence of this, because this is much disputed. Of course, Kastner had his trial in Israel, and it was somewhat inconclusive. There's a lot of political reasons, but the judge had condemned him in effect, although he was not jailed, I don't think. In fact, he was liberated, and that is why he was assassinated. On the question of a biased selection for this saved group, that is absolutely correct. But it wasn't pedantically observed. You know, you could get on it if you were Transylvanian. I think mostly professionals and prominent Transylvanians. But there were others who were not Transylvanians, who all kinds of influences were at work about who would get on it or not on this list. I mean. So that is essentially true, that it was an elitist selection, at least by intention, even if it's not in the end exactly so. And it was much resented later that a lot of people couldn't have access to that list of the saved. I don't think my family had any substantial amount to pay. It was purely because of the connections to the Transylvanian professional classes that I think we got onto. But so did uncle who had nothing to do with Transylvania, except he was vaguely related to us on my father's side, also part of it. My father was involved purely because he was married to a Transylvanian, my mom, and so on. Yes, this is extremely complicated story, and the most detailed account that I've heard, and the most authoritative knowledge, I think even beyond Tony, was from Chaim Bershith, also a historian, and he knew enormous detail about what negotiations were going on, and the fate of a particular train full of the collected wealth and goods, which strangely got lost, and he reckons that it fell in the hands of the leadership of the Zionist, Palestinian Zionist groups, which Kastner had connections to. And this is why, partly, he was incorporated in the leadership post-war, initially, the leadership of the Israeli state, before he was taken to court. So, it's a very fascinating story. According to the story of Chaim Bershith, it was intended to be a very much larger operation initiated by Himmler, involving millions of saved Jews.
Yeah.
And Western alliance, last-minute Western alliance against the Soviets. That negotiations were going on, or propositions put by the sections of the Nazi Germany, maybe not Hitler himself. And it had to be known by the Soviets that this was going on. So it's very, very complicated. Of course, in the end, the West turned down any kind of dealings. They were meant to be funding the trucks, for example, but they didn't. They weren't prepared to.
Yeah. Maybe a couple more questions.